Why isn't it easy?
We know why. Okay, we should be live, but the preview is showing me like it's just like the top part of my head.
Oh,
That's why I'm wondering if people can confirm that the
I
that
can see you. I can
No, I
see
know
you
you
in
can see
full.
me. You can see me, but I'm wondering if it looks okay to the audience or it looks strange to the audience. I'm going to need them to give me some kind of confirmation that it looks fine because the YouTube preview window is clearly messed up. So people will have to let me know. Uh, it's like it's like this weird little, just like the top of my head is in the
It's
preview window, like it's grabbing like one little corner.
like you're
So
looking through a
okay, all right.
letterbox. Okay.
Everyone's seeing the entire. Looks good to me. Okay. People are telling me that looks fine because if and people can see this on the screen because if what I'm seeing in the preview window is what's being exported out to YouTube, it is not a good show. So, hey Chris, how's it going?
Oh, fine, fine. Nice to chat with you again. I get an invite. It's always nice to talk
Yeah,
about things with
it's
you.
good timing. It's good timing.
Yeah.
So this is Chris Profit, and you wrote SpaceX from the ground. Do you have a copy of your book handy?
Well, I have the first edition. There's my bona fides.
The first edition. Hold on. Let me get you
Look
in
how
the screen. Hold it up again.
okay.
Yeah, there we go. Okay. Yeah,
Look how
SpaceX from the
thin
ground
that,
up.
that is. Look how thin it is. That's 87 pages. That's the first edition. That is compared to I think 273. I'm up to now.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we last talked. I checked. It was 2017. So it's been like 4 years, 4 years
Mm,
since we last talked. 2018. Anyway, it's been about 3 years since we last talked
yeah.
about SpaceX, and we've gone from your first edition to your sixth edition now.
Yeah. I'm actually working on my
Of
seventh, but
course you
that's all
are.
hush hush at the moment.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Like what a big secret. SpaceX is going to do new things, and you're going to have to update.
Oh, all the
Have you ever
time.
heard of a blog? Have you ever heard of like
Uh,
writing on the internet? I'm just
Well,
saying.
I have considered it, but I'm really even more cutting edge than that. I mean, normally, if you want to find me, I'm on the SpaceX Reddit because we're always working through
Yeah.
things there. I write stuff, put it up. I do posts regular there, and
Yep.
well, it seems to get a bigger audience, I think,
It
than trying
it
to drag into mine.
it's funny from like when we talked and sort of the work that you had done on the SpaceX Reddit
Hmm.
group subreddit. I added that to my list of regular places I go and look for news tips,
Hmm.
and it's been a wellspring. It's been great. There's been
Yes. Well,
tons and tons of really good, interesting ideas, new improvements that are happening in the SpaceX landscape that we've been able to incorporate into stories that we're working on. So
yeah.
it's an interesting
Forum.
sort of it's interesting like it's really sort of crossing the line, like what is media, what is community, what is
Hmm.
conversation, what is wild speculation. So
Hmm.
I think it's kind
Hmm.
of it's very impressive what's going on there. So for people who don't know who you are, who are you, what do you do?
Well, I'm a writer, and unfortunately, I haven't been able to do much else during the last year. It's been a bit crap as regards work, but
Yeah.
it has given me more time to write.
What,
So here I
I know
am.
the feeling. Yeah, for those of us
Yeah.
who were already spending a lot of time inside in front of a computer,
Mm.
yeah, we've been able to make the best of a horrible situation.
Yeah, I do creative writing. I help other people with their writing as well,
Yeah.
normally, and various bits and bobs around education.
And of course, what we're going to talk about is, sort of a big chunk of your life is writing this book, SpaceX from the ground up.
Yeah.
And so I guess maybe give us an update. I mean, I think, you know, last time we talked, I was on the weekly Space Hangout a couple of years ago just to sort of catch people
Mm.
up to speed. We talked about sort of where the idea of SpaceX came, what the ideas were,
Mm.
what kinds of new things they were working on, what a lot of the overall design philosophies were. I think now SpaceX has become a household name. It's
Mm.
really gone next level.
Yeah, it was trending this morning. I saw some of their videos.
Yeah,
They're
well, they
right
launched
up
a bunch
there.
of
Yeah.
Starlinks like last night.
Mm.
So what do you think has changed about SpaceX from or like in the last couple of years?
Well, I can only put it down to realistically big stuff. They've really hit the big targets like Falcon Heavy. That was very highly followed, that launch, and they had some great soundtrack for that. That sort of dragged people in initially, but then of course the US has lacked capability to get to their own space station for since 2012, and they've able to restore that in assistance with NASA, of course. And I mean, that is major. I mean, people are interested in people. That's what I say to my creative writing class. So you can launch 1,000 satellites, but you launch one man, and people go, right, yes,
Yeah.
all right, that's interesting. Because everything's on the line, yeah.
Yeah.
But of course, now we're on to the real big leagues, which is Starship.
Right. So
Yes.
I mean, like, do you think that like the reusability was critical? And I think that for a lot of people, we saw reusability as the destination, the reusability of the Falcon 9. But it's not, is it? It never has been.
No. It's just a stepping stone on the way. It's just that the last big thing they did before Starship, basically. It's an essential technology. I mean, Elon said it countless times. I mean, it's the only form of transport where you toss it in the ocean, and when you've done when you've done half a launch. It's ridiculous. It's one of these things where national security providers think, well, we'll make more money if we throw it away every time, so that's what we'll do. And there was no change. And Elon came along and went, "What? No, you're not going to get it.
Yeah.
You want to get anywhere, then you've got to really savor this technology and make most use of it." I mean, that's the plan for Mars. You take off, you put it in orbit, you're a completely empty spacecraft, but you've got a massive spacecraft in orbit. Then you refill it, goes to Mars. It takes a big payload there, and then you refill it on Mars, bring it back, all using the same engines, all the same hardware. It's one of those, oh, why didn't we think of that sort of moments?
They did. I mean, it's funny. I love to look through old NASA design documents, and you look back at the original space shuttle concept, and it looked like two space shuttles sitting on top of each other. One big space shuttle that was the tank, and then a smaller one that was going to be the orbiter. And they would launch together, either horizontally off a runway, or they would launch as a vertical stack, make it to a certain point, and then the main vehicle would detach. The fuel tank would return to Earth and land on a landing pad, and then the orbiter would fly to space, and then it would fly around. So I mean, as soon as NASA and the others figured out stage rocketry, they were asking themselves the question, how do we not throw these things in the garbage every time? But they never could come up with an answer, with a way that was feasible and practical and did the trick. What did SpaceX figure out that at this point nobody else had been able to figure out? What was the key to the solution, do you think?
Well, I think it's simplification, basically, decomplexing the whole situation, because you had so many different groups pulling space shuttle in so many different directions. It was Rockwell, I believe, that built the actual shuttle itself.
Well, they built the engines, yeah.
The engines, but the shuttle itself was made the same way you would normally make an aircraft, which was aluminium. But because it was aluminium and you expose aluminium to heat, it catches fire. You had to enclose the whole thing in tiles. Every single thing had to be enclosed in tiles. So you're just putting enormous amount of complexity and weight on it. And then you got the US Air Force saying they want to do long S's and course corrections, and so you've got the big wings bolted on, and it all starts to get, it's a classic design by committee, really. Where Elon just says, okay, we need something that will drop into the atmosphere. What's best? Well, this austenitic steel, just S304 or S30X as he's moving to, that'll take most of the heat. You only need like a strip on the windward side just to take the massive heat from the initial sort of impact with the atmosphere.
But I mean, my reading of it is that it's computers that have that have unlocked the whole technology of reusable rockets landing at their, vertically.
Oh, yes.
That,
it couldn't be done without the high computing, but the actual re-entry and reusing the Starship, that could be done anytime. It was just a question of just looking at it from an engineer's point of view rather than a politician or a militician or NASA bureaucrat, trying to do some, what was the term? Bureaumancy on it.
Bureaumancy, I like that. But I mean, really, when you look at all those technologies, I mean, it really is the speed and density of the compute that is making all of the tiny little course corrections as the rocket is returning to Earth at supersonic speeds to be able to then to be able to then just slow it down and land it vertically using its flaps and its rockets, just the gimbaling on the rockets to be able to actually make it land. That is like, you couldn't do it. A human being couldn't make that maneuver happen, but a computer can do it. And we've only had computers capable of doing that kind of operation just fairly recently. There's like some artificial intelligence going on inside these things.
It's Lars Blackmore, basically. He takes a stochastic approach to guiding re-entry and landing. I mean, basically the rocket is descending, and then it says, all right, where am I now? Where should I be on my approach? What are the methods I can use to get back on approach onto that correct trajectory? And then it works down the list of all of them and evaluates which one is the best one to use. And then it selects that. Then it applies that, and it does that like a couple of thousand times every second, right? So it keeps hitting the middle of the X, so it's obviously working. But luckily, they've still got Lars with them. He was one of the early guys, and he was with them right from relatively early on. I think it was this last decade, and he's still with them, and he's in charge of Mars landings now. So I mean, you could tell from the Starship the way it comes in. I mean, the approach was absolutely perfect. It was lovely. It was just the little engineering bit at the end.
Yeah. So have you watched what happened with the test of Starship? We watched it yesterday. Was that right? Yesterday?
Yeah.
What went wrong? So, just to catch you, you all know what happened. What went wrong?
Okay, well, what went wrong is one of the engines failed to start. It was a bum start, basically. Now, what caused that? Well, you've got a whole fault tree that they've assembled. I mean, I can give you some of the highlights.
Sure, let's get right into the weeds. What went wrong with that test?
On the ascent, they usually show on a little sub panel the rocket engines firing, and then they show them cutting out one by one as they need less thrust. They started off showing it, but then there was a little bit of a sign of an engine fire, just a small engine fire, and then they stopped showing it. So I think that was rather political, because they want to impress NASA at the moment for this human landing system. So they probably didn't want to show that. That might have contributed.
So you think that they knew there was a problem? There might have been a problem with the rocket even on ascent.
Oh, well, there's always problems. It's just whether it's going to be turn into a critical one. I mean, it was something that they obviously didn't want to show people. But then it nosed over. That was fine. The approach was fine. It was right on target. And then they should have ignited two. They only ignited one. I can only presume they have fixed the problem which they have with SN8, which was tank pressurization. They had insufficient pressurization to push the fuel through to the. I mean, it's incredible that the engines, they require 6 bar of propellant pressure force. They are really greedy engines. I mean, I believe it's like 2 bar for the Falcon 9, so they really like that fuel shoved in. So in any case, I believe they fixed that, but for some reason they had a bad startup. It just refused to start up, and that was it. It was insufficient for us, because they do. It's almost like a suicide burn where they just flip it round at the last moment to point to the ground, and then maximum thrust with 2 engines to stop. But they didn't get that required thrust. It's a problem they've got with the design a little bit, because the tanks are finite. The header tanks they use, they don't use the main tanks. They just have these inset header tanks, and there's only so much fuel. So you've got to wait to the last moment to flip it around, do that hard burn, and kill all that momentum. But
with the previous one with SN8. The engine's working fine. It was that they couldn't get you've got the main fuel tanks, which were used for the ascent, and then you've got this secondary tank right at the very top that's kept at a nice pressure, and it's ready to go because the fuel sloshes around inside the main fuel tanks, and so it can't dependably deliver the fuel when it's time for the thing to land. And so they've got this secondary tank that's only job is to deliver that little puff of fuel right at the moment that it needs to make its descent burn. And for whatever reason with SN8, they weren't able to get it pressurized. They weren't able to get fuel out to the engines in time to make it work. This time around, the feeling is that the pressure was there because one of the engines went nicely, but they weren't able to get that second engine lit, and it wasn't able to provide the descent. I mean, I'm sure it's weird. These seem like problems that could have been troubleshooted out.
Well, they are pushing very hard for these. I mean, they were really impatient to get this one done, but they were waiting on FAA and waiting, and then finally they got their go-ahead, so they just went for it. But these engines, they test them very hard. In fact, the earlier ones were tested to destruction, basically. So we don't know the history of this particular engine that failed, but it might not have been the engine's fault. It might have been a case that some of the pressurant actually got into the fuel line, and then and then caused the engine to eat propellant and pressurant, which it really doesn't like. It just needs cold fuel. No gases in there whatsoever.
Did you just grab some water? If you want, I can answer some questions from the audience. If you want to go grab yourself a glass of water.
No, I'm okay.
You're all right? Okay.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, I learned that I always have water.
I went out for a run earlier on today. I'm still a bit cold.
Yeah. I know that. Cold out. I know that feeling too, where you just just gets everything working. All right. So then, what is the status? Like as of today, what does the Starship fleet look like?
Well, they've got loads of them. As I say, there was actually 2 on the pad when they launched SN9. I mean, there's one queue. They've got a queue of them.
Yeah. SN10 looking nervously over as SN9 detonates on the pad. Yeah.
Starhoppers there on the side going, no, I've done that twice. Yeah. But they've got a whole line of them. SN11 is right behind them. And we got SM15. That's already started. They've jumped to 15 because they were so happy with the first high altitude flight, SN8. They scrapped the ones in between the pieces they're working. But SM15 is supposed to be quite an advance. They've done quite a few changes to the construction. So we're not quite sure some of the stuff they've done, but obviously it's major because they figured the intervening ones are not going to be useful. They just want to go on to this more advanced version, which is much closer to the orbital.
So, and we don't know what's going to be in it yet. Like we don't know what the advances are. What's the rumor mill say?
Well, if it was me, I'd be putting different wings on there because you've seen the flaps they use. The ones at the back are classically body flaps, they class them as. The ones at the front, well, I think they're better described as canards. So, but they're a bit chunky and they're a bit okay for the job. Whereas I think if they're going to be doing hypersonic entry in it, they're going to want to have something a little bit more swept. That's what I believe, if from what I can see of it.
So you mean sort of like smaller, like much smaller wings?
Possibly swept, like the Concorde
Mm-hmm.
wings, and the space shuttle. They had a more sort of swept,
Yeah.
whereas these are just like quite chunky and functional, which is fine for the job they're doing at the moment, which is
Right.
just
Right.
dropping from about 10K.
Well, we were speculating a bit on this last night on the Weekly Space Hangout, just how, like, why do they wait so long to do the flip? Why do they do the flip right at the last minute? Wouldn't it make more sense to have a longer descent and try to manage it? But I wonder if those wings, like, they're fundamentally different from the grid fins that are on the current Falcon 9 boosters and what's going to be on the Super Heavy. So I don't know whether the spacecraft can be vertical for any long period of time and be stable with those wings in the configuration.
It can be stable, but the whole time it's like vertical like that, you're accelerating towards the ground. I mean, it's got it is quite fast, even when it's doing its skydiver. But as soon as you put it vertical, well, then you're going to start picking up speed, and all that speed needs to be negated. This is one of the problems they've got at the moment. It's the supertanker problem, turning a supertanker, except for in this case, you're not turning it, you're stopping it, and you've got the force of gravity pulling it down. So, you've got a large mass heading towards the ground, being pulled towards the ground, and all of a sudden you've got to stop it on a dime pretty much. So
Right.
they want to flip it and just stop it straight away before it starts accelerating towards the ground any more than it is. So, and of course, the closer you can do to the ground, the more fuel you save, because
Right.
you don't want to be carrying around. And every extra ton of fuel you have for landing is one less ton of fuel you have for payload. So they're being very aggressive. You have to applaud their effort.
Yeah. Is it?
Yeah.
But is it almost too aggressive? Like it does seem. I mean, here we are, armchair rocket scientists. But it does feel like there's a lot of kinks to work out in the system, and the Falcon 9 has minutes to make sure all of its engines are working properly. It's able to light them, and when it does its descent and do its hyper slam, right?
No, hover slam.
Hover slam. Yeah,
They class it as hover slam, not a suicide burn. It's called a hover slam because that's much better.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the trick with the hover slam, like I know with the Falcon 9, the way those Merlin engines work, it can't hover the rocket. It can't. They're too powerful. So you're either going up or you're falling. And so the trick with the Merlins is that they have to run those engines at the last second so that they perfectly balance out their falling with being on the ground. But I know with the Raptors, they can tweak the thrust. They can throttle them down. They could make, as we saw with the hopper and with the grain silo. I mean, that thing could hover on a couple of its Raptor engines, one Raptor engine if it wanted to, but it's guzzling fuel the whole time.
Yeah. I mean, it's quite beautiful the way the Falcon 9 achieves it, because it gets to a certain altitude and it says, okay, I can apply a certain amount of deceleration over a certain amount of time, so it hits that startup at the correct altitude, and the whole time from that point onwards, it's steadily decelerating until it achieves zero velocity at zero altitude, even though it's got more thrust than it actually needs to hover. But the Raptor, I think it can throttle down to about 20%. It's like ridiculously flexible, so they can do whatever they like with it. But I did notice that on the Twitter today that Elon Musk was saying, what we should have done is really ignited all three, stop the craft pretty much above the pad, and then decided which ones we wanted to down select. If there was one that didn't start, obviously you go with the two that did. Or if you do have three start, you can go, okay, which one's the prime engine, which one's performing better than the other one. So they are going at it very aggressively, but this is the fail early and learn from experience.
Mm-hmm.
If this has happened over Mars, if they'd have said, "Oh right, well we've had
Yeah.
great chances. Oh, every time we've landed, both of our engines are fired up,
And all
and that's
200 colonists have died. Yeah.
yes, exactly." Whereas now they go, well, we actually have 3 engines, and the reason why we didn't use them is we didn't have it in the software to have 3 engines available. We chose engine 1 and engine 2, and
Yeah.
that was it, do or die. But now they know.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
know, fail fast, fail forward.
Yeah. And I think that, I mean, I think they've got enough momentum. They've got enough credibility. Like back in the early days, I know that Musk is always fond of saying that if Falcon had failed one more time, his whole business would have gone under. The SpaceX would have just disappeared. But now, I mean, he can smash starships into Boca Chica for months, and nobody's going to have a problem with it.
Well, except for the FAA.
Yeah, sure. The FAA might start taking some concerns with it, but the point being, like from a financial standpoint, from a momentum standpoint, we understand that this is complicated. It's going to require iterations. It's going to take testing and so on. So let's assume that SN10 works fine. That we see some new improvements. We see a nice safe landing. SN10 gets to retire healthy as a one continuous piece of metal, as opposed to a rapid disassembly. What comes next?
Okay, well, what comes next is what's in the big hangar, the high bay, and that's the super heavy booster. It's not the orbital booster. It's just got, I believe, 4 engine mounts on it. So they'll probably put it on one of those test stands, A or B, and see how far they can get up in the sky with it, and see if they can land it again. So it's the same process basically, but they're using grid things. But they're a lot more confident with Super Heavy than they were with Starship.
It's a big Falcon 9 first stage.
Exactly.
Yeah.
They've got that down. Well, let's hope they're not too overconfident about that. But as you say, I mean, the only real question mark is whether they can get the arm to reach out and grab it in midair and then support it and put it back on the pad, which is what they're planning on doing.
And I know that's sort of like a long-term theoretical plan. Are they actually building any kind of infrastructure to support that? I know that they bought a couple of old oil platforms, Phobos and Deimos.
Yeah. I mean, the orbital launch pad is underway. They are building it. They keep putting in new lines for the propellant and power, so it does seem to be underway. But as you say, they're working in parallel. They've got these 2 oil rigs that they bought for a song, really, from a company that was going insolvent. So, and they're converting them. I think, to be honest, those oil rigs, they're mainly going to be using them for the crane, just to lift it onto the launch platform. That's probably going to be a separate floating platform along adjacent to it, and they might also put the fuel on there with the crane.
Well, that was my joke. Structure. That was Elon Musk's long game, was to develop Tesla, to reduce the world's need for oil, to reduce the price of oil platforms, to be able to use them for his rocket business. So we've got the development of the Super Heavy going in tandem with the tests of Starship. So what do you, and we think, so Starship, let's say they solve the problems, if it's not SN10, then it's SN11. If it's not SN11, it's SN15. And then the Super Heavy. So when do you think we'll see our first Super Heavy flight?
Well, it's advancing quite well, the construction. I mean, they're not just making prototypes. They have a whole production line here. I mean, this is how they can have multiple flight articles on the pad at the same time, because they're just kicking them out. It's a regular production line, but that's the way Elon likes it. Every time they make a new one, they iterate the design and they improve it, and the faster the production, the faster you can apply the iteration. So BN1, coming back to your question, BN1 as it's called, it could be on the pad on March.
Wow.
Yeah. It could be there. I mean, they only need to bolt on 4 engines basically, and it's the same tank structures as the basic Starship, except for stretched. They put some batteries on the top. I can't see any reason why it can't be there by March. And but they'll be fiddling around with it for quite a bit, I think. So we might not see it, until April, perhaps. But I mean, it's easy enough to do, just to take off with 4 engines and land. I mean, the real question comes when you bolt on 28 engines, which was like, and then see what happens, right? And I mean, I think the thrust structure is one of the things I had a little question mark over. Have we got this right? Because the weight's got to be right and the strength's got to be right, and it's all got to be right.
Right. And so when do you think we're looking at an attempt at an orbital flight? Does that come quickly after? Like, do you give me a time frame? Do you think?
I mean, they've got to get both of these stages working independently. They've got to be absolutely spot on. So I don't see it. Elon says at the end of this year. That's what I put in my book, because that's what Elon says.
Right.
So I mean, we've got to be optimistic. That's a big job, because he's still. Well, I mean, on his good days, when something good happens, he's still aiming for 2022 and 2024 for landings on Mars. But when he has bad days, when he's talking about, it's going to be 5 years, so let's
2026
around
is the
turn of
date.
year.
2022 not going to happen. 2024 is his optimistic time frame. 2026, he now seems sort of the one that he's more realistically targeting, which still seems like a fantasy dream to me. Like, if it's before the mid 2030s, I think it'll still be an incredible accomplishment. But I mean, have any of the prototypes been like heat shielded? Like, have any of them got the heat shield?
Well, actually, SN10 has a fairly large sort of swath of heat shield on it to test it. Actually, SN9 had some heat shield ties on. Yeah, but I'm pretty sure they found they didn't continue adherence.
and they didn't help with the heat of the explosion. So
no.
Yeah.
Oh dear. But they're testing. As soon as they get one back that lands, they'll be able to see what the effect of that airborne effects on it was. Yes.
But we won't know really what's going to happen with an actual orbital reentry, because that still feels to me like the big unknown. Is like, it feels like every other piece of this makes sense. I think they'll figure out that weird flippy landing. They've obviously got the belly flop maneuver going. They've got the Raptor engines work like a charm. The thing can take off on its own or as part of the Super Heavy. I don't think the Super Heavy is going to be that much of a technology challenge, although the scale might be an issue. But it's that orbital reentry, which feels to me like the big question
I mean, it's
mark.
the same as the shuttle. That was the problem with the shuttle. That orbital entry was the big problem. And I mean, hopefully now they've gone to like Tough Rock, which is the same tile as they use on the X-37. The Boeing mini shuttle.
Yep.
That's a lot tougher. It's a lot lighter, and they're backing it with silicone, so there's less heat transfer. I mean, I say it's tough rock, but I'm sure the SpaceX engineers are taking a look at it and go, I think we can improve on that. That's exactly what they did with the Pika, which NASA gave them. They went from Pika to Pika X, and like 3 iterations of that in real quick time. So yeah, I'm sure they're working on it, but it's if they can get that heat shield down, that is. But even if the heat shield fails, it's not like the shuttle. If one tile comes off, then or you get a leading edge fail, then it's automatically destroyed. No, that is quite strong, firm substrate of stainless material.
Yeah, stainless steel underneath.
Yeah, so they still got a chance. They need a quite catastrophic failure for the whole thing to fail. I mean, they'll get something back. It might be a bit bent and melted, but it should be good.
Well, as you said, aluminum ignites in a way that stainless steel just won't catch on fire in the same way. So let's talk about that assuming they get that sorted, and we see this thing taking off and returning. Then we're starting to move into the actual practical applications. So how ready is the world? Because, I mean, it's safe to say that this is going to decrease launch costs by a factor of 10, maybe a factor of 100. Like, it's hard to really wrap our minds around how the world changes when you've got a reusable launch system that is this inexpensive. What do you think happens next?
Lots of things. I mean, when you can get a launch down to 5 million, which is what they're talking about. I mean, NASA's talking about launching LUVOIR on it, their big observatory. That's going to be a splendid thing. I mean, I'm certain that SpaceX are trying to negotiate with NASA to put the Europa Clipper on there. What they'll probably offer the Falcon Heavy and say, look, we have this launch vehicle, we can definitely launch, but if you want to go there in 1 year instead of 7.
Well, I don't think it can do it in 1 year, but it can definitely.
Well,
knock...
I think
oh, really?
If you can put a kick stage on top of Starship, right? Something, I don't know. There's like ACES, something like that, with a really good ISP. I mean, you're talking about 150 tons to a reference orbit, so it's quite a substantial kick stage.
Right.
Then. Maybe I'm exaggerating on a year, but
you
can get there quick.
But the ACES was the original kick stage they were going to use on the Galileo. That was the one, or was it Cassini? Galileo? It was on Galileo. It was the one they were going to use on Galileo, and it was going to allow Galileo to make a straight shot from Earth to Jupiter. And then with the launch of the Challenger, they decided that it wasn't safe to put something like ACES on Challenger, and they switched to a less risky Centaur upper stage, and then they had to do all of those orbital slingshots to be able to actually make the journey out to Jupiter. So yeah, I mean, a powerful like an ACES kick stage or some other kick stage on top would be game changing. I mean, I can even imagine like we get to a point where it's kind of like the Expanse, where you do a burn in one direction and then your rocket turns around and does a deceleration burn to get into orbit. And you're starting to really knock down the time. And I don't think we know what a fully refueled Starship in orbit is capable of delivering to other worlds.
I mean, you have various options. I mean, you could actually go for a Raptor-derived kick stage. That they produced a prototype engine which was only 1 meganewton thrust. The current one is like 2 meganewtons, so they could use something like that. Then they have Methalox fuel, the same as the actual the second stage, the Starship. They could refuel the Starship in low Earth orbit and have it on a very wide elliptical orbit, and then kick out the kick stage. And then now you're talking about some serious, I mean, use an Oberth effect. Even if you can line it up right, the moon and Earth, you could have like an Oberth cannon and kick it past both of them. So yeah, there's all kinds of clever stuff you can do, and they have all the options on the table, but they've got to convince NASA that it's all good. So, right. Yeah, Starship, it's great.
Yeah. And I think that's the one audience member who maybe does have a few concerns watching two of these things explode on landing pad. Like NASA will never let human beings onto this thing.
Well, never say never. That's all I can say.
Sure.
I mean, what can I say about SLS? Frankenstein, make work. I don't know.
But it's the space shuttle. It's if the space shuttle was essentially reconfigured into a vertical way. So you just
you've cut up a space shuttle, and then with a Frankenstein monster, you've made a moon.
You've reassembled the space shuttle to be like a Saturn V. Job done. Everybody gets to keep their jobs. Yeah.
But it's overwhelming, really. I think we'll get to a tipping point where it's just obvious it has to go this one way. At the moment, Starship is fine. It was designed to go to Mars. It's great. It goes to low Earth orbit. It gets topped up 4 to 6 times. Let's say 6 times because there might be propellant boil off or losses during fuel transfer. And it goes to Mars, and then it uses atmospheric braking to stop, bleed off all that velocity, and then land. It's great. But that's fine as a system. That's what it's designed for. But now they've started talking about it's not just a Mars, it's also a moon vehicle. Now you think, well, hang on a moment, that the whole company mission is Mars, 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 and now they also talking about the moon. I mean, they said they didn't want to divert to the moon, but all of a sudden that's on the menu.
Yeah.
So it's a little bit odd. But I think Elon, I think it's fair to say he's a long-term planner. He likes to sort of look to problems in the future and solve them before he gets there. So I think basically the problem is, yes, you can have one vessel go to Mars and do 7 launches. That's fine. You've got 26 months. If you have like an orbital fuel depot, you can even take those 6 launches, the tanker flights up there, store the fuel, and it's all ready to go when you get your Mars window open.
That's, I mean, I think that orbital refueling is something that has never happened in any significant way. It's been tested out a couple of times. There's some capability on the International Space Station to do some minor servicing, but to truly, it's when you think about how much propellant is required, how much fuel is required to go from the surface of the Earth to orbit. You've got an empty tank every time, no matter what, no matter how well you've crafted your engine, you're almost out of fuel.
The way I look at it, you're spending a bucket of fuel to take a thimble to orbit.
Yeah.
So that is exactly that. You've put your finger on it. That's exactly the problem. I mean, those 6 flights is fine. Yeah, you can do it. But Elon says to make that large settlement on Mars, you need 1,000 starships going to there. So if you have 1,000 starships, that makes 6,000 tanker flights. Now, yes, you've got 26 months and you've got a great plethora of orbital fuel depots, but it starts to get complicated at that phase. If you miss any of those tankers crash, that means you're only going to be launching 600 starships and whatever you like that. So this is the problem I think he's addressing now, which is why the moon is now on the menu, because you can Starship is not really ideal for the moon, because you need like a similar amount of fuel to get there, like 6 tankers. Then you need 6 tankers to get it back, and assuming you've got a orbital depot around the moon. So it's not fantastic, but they're still going for it, which seems a little bit odd. But if they can take one of their starships, their propellant plant starships, which they want to put all of the in situ resource utilization equipment into one starship, or all the plant that you need to convert materials you find on Mars into propellant. And of course, you've got the propellant tanks in the vehicle as well. So you just process the atmosphere, process the water, and you store the propellant in the actual vehicle. So it's all one. It's one vehicle. If they can put one of those on the moon, if they can drop one of those into one of those northern lunar craters, which is permanently shadowed, assuming you can solve the energy problem. Say you have a nuclear reactor, or you run a superconducting line out to the rim of the I almost said rim of the volcano there, the rim of the crater.
Right.
So
you keep your Starship in the cold, and then you run your solar panels out to the crater.
Yeah, onto the rim of the crater, because they have peaks of eternal light there, where, because it's at the north, the sun is always shining, it's always illuminated, which is perfect. And you go and superconducting cable, no problem at cryogenic temperatures. So you can do that. You can produce buckets of fuel in those craters with one craft, and then and the good thing about it is, if you can send if you want to send a tanker from the moon to low Earth orbit, it's only like 2.7, I believe, is the delta V to get from the moon to Earth orbit. Because basically you just go retrograde against the direction the moon is orbiting the Earth. That kills the orbital velocity, and then you just drop towards the Earth. And when you get there, you aerobrake and just pop up into orbit. It's a beautiful way of delivering fuel to the orbit. Normally, it's like over 10 kilometers per second delta V to get from Earth surface to low Earth orbit. As you say, it's a bucket to get a thimble. But in the moon's case, you're spending like a thimble to get a bucket into low Earth orbit. It's a beautiful solution. So instead of taking 6 tankers from Earth, you only need
Right.
1 from the moon.
Yeah.
Right.
Or I mean, I even think about like not necessarily the moon, like even just low Earth like near Earth asteroids. Like there are places that they're discovering there's probably a lot more volatiles and water in asteroids that are in the inner solar system than anyone
I
ever
would
thought.
agree with you there, but we know on the moon there's been chemical vapor deposition. All the volatiles have just piled up in these craters over eons. It's there on the surface. All you need is basically a bulldozer just to fork it up and put it in the hopper. Whereas on asteroids, you might have to like break them up and get, because the whole surface of the asteroid is exposed to sunlight, so any volatiles are just going to go.
Right. But they're finding that they're. I mean, this is what we're learning from Hayabusa and from Bennu, is that it looks like it's actually quite a lot under the surface. So,
there was. Yeah.
And so,
but
I mean,
it's so much easier though on the moon, because it's at cryogenic temperatures in the craters, and the materials are on the surface. It doesn't look. It's right there. It's in front of you. It's like there's gold. Right. Yeah. It doesn't get any easier than that, basically, from an engineering point of view. I mean, yes, I agree. NASA could point to the fact is, there's a certain amount of water in these rocks. But what I like about the moon, right? I mean, a lot of people, when you meet them on Reddit, they say, "Oh no, it's impossible to produce methalox propellant on the moon because we know there's no carbon on the surface, or so low it's ridiculous." But the NASA, let's see, it was L-Cross mission. They dropped an impactor there into the lunar craters, and yes, it kicked up a pile of water, which was on the surface, but it also showed there was carbon dioxide, carbon monoxide, and methane, all volatiles that have been accreted onto the surface. So it's, it doesn't get any better than that. You need very, very little carbon to make methalox fuel, because methalox fuel is, well, for a Raptor, it's 3.5 times the amount of oxygen by mass as it is methane, and methane is 1 carbon atom and 4 hydrogen atoms. So you're talking a quarter, and then 3.5 times that in oxygen. So you don't need much carbon. It all seems to work out quite well.
I'd love to take on some questions from the audience who are watching.
Sure.
So Arjone is asking, could Starship have anything to do with the Lunar Gateway?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, that's the plan. They want to take the lander they've got and take astronauts from the gateway down to the surface, come back up to the gateway, and maybe have it like a trailing dump there, a fuel dump where they can refuel it, and they just keep using it. So I mean, it's a fantastic lander compared to the alternatives. It has dual airlocks, as I understand it, and they both feed. So if one's being used for ingress, the other one egress, and you have a common sort of dirty room, because the moon is a pretty dirty environment. All those ground up nanite crystals there. You really want to just keep them in one area, and so you have a decontamination area, a common suiting area, and it's large, it's big. You're not sort of crammed in there. You can have people coming and going at the same time, and you've got decks above it, decks and decks above it, where you can have all sorts of equipment. And
I mean, there could be as much internal volume in a Starship as there will be on the Lunar Gateway. I mean, it's cavernous.
Yeah. You could launch the whole thing on a Starship.
Yeah. Which one is the space station and which one is the delivering people? All right. Ben Kalo asks, is there any public data on the cost per Starship test for SpaceX? Do we know how much these chunks of shredded stainless steel are costing?
Well, all I can say is they have 2 mega products on the go at the moment, which is Starlink and Starship, of course, and they're just about to have their second round for $2 billion, I believe, share issue, and it's hardly been 6 months since they had the last one. So we're talking about burning through maybe $2 billion a year just on Starship. So I think that's a lot of money. If you want, it all depends on the launch rate. How much is it costing them? it's millions, lots.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, just in terms of like, do you think it's $100 million in wreckage? Is it $5 million? Do you think, how much do you think these things cost?
Well, Elon says he can do them for 5 million,
That's
basically.
crazy.
But yes, it is crazy. But they're
Yeah,
producing them at a fast rate, and I say they're producing boosters and
yeah. I mean, when you think
all
about
sorts.
the raw material, I mean, it is fuel tanks, it
Mm.
is stainless steel exoskeleton, and then it is very fancy rocket engines and computers and batteries.
It's the engines which are expensive. I
Yeah,
mean, the stainless steel, it's just like nothing. It's by comparison. But those engines, the testing of it, the construction of them, development of them, it's always the engines. That's always the most important part during any development for rockets. That they're the complex item. Everything else is built around the engine. Everything else is sort of relatively cheap
yeah.
and easy.
And that's of course one of the greatest tragedies of the Space Launch System is that they're taking the most beautiful engines ever
Mm.
made, the RS-25s, and smashing
Yeah.
them into the atmosphere. It just breaks my heart every time I have to hear about this.
Yeah, the old ways, they got to have disposable because that makes most money for them. So that's the way they're going to stick to right to the end. But disruption is coming. It is
Well,
coming.
I don't think. I mean, it is a funny time, right? That we are sort of at this point where the future doesn't exist yet, but it's clearly coming in some form.
Mm,
And so, what bet does NASA make in saying, do you launch humans on the Falcon Heavy? Probably. Do you
mm.
launch humans on the Falcon 9 on the Crew Dragon and then dock on some bigger spacecraft that's been launched by a Falcon Heavy? I think that makes the most sense. And then if Starship later on is able to deliver a bigger, a more interesting lunar ferry boat to
Mm.
space, and then the astronauts launch on Falcon on Crew Dragon and then transfer to the ferry boat in space. Like, I think using some combination of a very proven, very safe launcher like Crew Dragon on top of Falcon, matched with just the raw launch capacity of either the Falcon Heavy or Starship, makes a ton
Mm.
of sense.
Mm.
Even if you're disposing of Starships, which would be heartbreaking to think about, you've still got the first stage Super Heavy and then that second stage launching an enormous payload into orbit.
Mm.
So,
I mean, I agree with you. You hedge your bets. You
yeah,
don't just put it all on one or on the other. I
yeah,
mean, they've got SLS at the moment, which they're pushing forward with, and Orion,
yeah,
and that will get people to space eventually if they just keep plugging away.
yeah,
And then you've got Starship, which just delivers enormous cargo capacity for the moon and fantastic. You're basically landing a tower block on the moon, right, for accommodation and facilities. And when they arrive, they've just got everything they need. So yeah, it's good what they're doing it the right way. They're hedging their bets.
yeah,
Some on SLS, some on Starship, but they say they want Starship for later on because they want to have a sustained presence on the moon. They want to have a proper base. So
yeah,
having something which is reusable and could deliver substantial cargo,
yeah,
100 tons to the moon, more perhaps if they have
yeah.
orbital depots, then that's what to do. They've
Yeah, I
got
mean,
to
it's
sort of
it's such a tricky
it's
time.
powers to
People
think.
say like, oh, why bother working on SLS at all? And I kind of agree with that,
Mm,
because you do have, not because you have Starship, because like, we can just go watch blooper reels of Starships exploding, and go, that's not ready. But you do
mm.
have Falcon Heavies and you do have Falcon 9s.
Well, tell Elon because he says it's all going to be cut. Soon as Starship's
Oh,
fired,
for
that's
sure,
it.
for
They're
sure.
all
Of
gone.
course he does. Yeah, yeah, yeah. He's living, 20 years into our future.
Yeah.
Tellus Mars is saying, what about Blue Origin in this disruption? When do you see Blue Origin from the ground up?
Well, we might actually see a pickup in pace, because I understand that Jeff Bezos has of Amazon.
Yeah,
So,
yeah. Bezos is stepping down from Amazon.
mm,
Do you think? Because that's his dream too. It's so funny. You hear about the backgrounds of Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos, and they are
mm,
both just absolute space nerds.
mm,
That's their true passion is O'Neill cylinders and Mars colonies and
mm.
heading off to other star systems. So I wonder if Jeff Bezos is just going to double down on Blue Origin at this point.
It could well do. That's what suggests to me, because I mean, Elon just puts in insane amount of hours for SpaceX. I mean, he has the Tesla Design Studio on the same campus at Hawthorne, so he'll just do as many hours as needed at SpaceX and just toddle across the road to to Tesla and say, yeah, I like the look of that. I don't like the look of that. Go ahead. And
now let's go to the boring company. Yeah.
Yeah. Yes, and that's in the car park outside. Yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
So yeah, it's all really easy for him, but Jeff just doesn't put in that same amount of time. Well, not up until this point, which is possibly what's needed. They
that
need
would be
somebody
amazing.
to ramrod it, because to do space development, to push any technology, it's do or don't do. Right, you've got to say, right, I'm committing to this.
Yeah.
I mean, there was one woman engineer who works at SpaceX, and she says, oh, well, we were working really late at night, into the early hours, just working out design problems, sorting it out. This isn't a 9-to-5 job. If you want to push technology, you've got to really commit. It's got to be your passion, and you're going to want to do that. So hopefully this is what we're seeing with Jeff. He is passionate about it, and now he's going to get stuck in.
Yeah, it is interesting that I mean, both started working on this around the same time, and Jeff Bezos went and made like the world's largest company and became the world's richest person. But I'm sure
well, he was.
Yeah, but I'm sure. So that's not, it's not like he's a failure, but I'm sure part of him is like looking at what's at just the really aggressive, really successful pace of SpaceX and saying that could have been us, that we could have put in the same amount of energy and taken the same kinds of risks and gotten a little further along than we did. But I think you didn't catch my actual original question, which was, when do we see a Blue Origin from the ground up? Are you going to write the Blue Origin book?
Well, they're a little bit too secretive for me. I say I'd have to hack them via the Amazon side, I think, to get any decent information. Now that would be a challenge. I like a challenge, but now I to be honest, I think the real future is SpaceX, because they are just going for it. As Yoda says, do or don't do, don't try. There is no try.
Yeah.
They are doing, and Elon has a point. If you don't really drive for the line, go for it, then you'll fail. A good example was back in 2008. The Great Recession. They'd had three failures, and if they hadn't have got that fourth launch as a success, the company would have failed. But because they were really driving for it, and they were pushing in those launches, every couple of months towards the end there, that they managed to get across the line, and then they could say to investors, look, we have a rocket that works, give us some money. And they did, and then they went to NASA and said, look, you want a bigger rocket, we've got a working engine, we've got to orbit, we'll build you a replacement for the space shuttle capability. And they said, fine, you've got a working rocket. But if they hadn't have really pushed for it, got that final result in the shortest time possible, they'd have failed. And this is the problem. What was the Microsoft guy who made a plane that was going to do air launches, and unfortunately he died before they actually got to the fact that they...
Are you talking about right, the Strato launcher?
Yes, that's it.
Paul Allen, who passed away.
Paul Allen, that's the guy. I mean, it just take it at a normal pace, 9-to-5 job. You end up dying before you even see the product come to fruition. No, do or don't do. You've got they work every hour that God sends.
Well, Chris, I don't want to take any more of your time. The book is SpaceX from the Ground Up. You've already gone through 6 editions. You are rapidly iterating your book at the same pace that SpaceX is iterating their actual underlying technology, which is great to see. You're stepping up every day and revising your material to keep pace with their pace.
There is one thing I'd like to say, though. It seems quite rosy in the future for space in the US at least, because Joe Biden is actually a secret space fan. He was in his teens during the 60s, so of course he was there 60 space race. He has a section of moon rock that in his
I saw that.
Oval Office. So he's, it's there.
Yeah, he moved the moon into the Oval Office.
Yeah. So I mean, I understand that he said next to nothing about it during the election, because the campaign managers say to him, look, don't mention space during the election, because people want guns and butter. Basically, they want to know what they're going to be eating and how we're going to defend in and where's the money coming from. But once you get there, Jen Psaki said, oh yes, they're quite in favour of going to the moon and Mars, because he's a big fan of Mars. So I think things looking quite bright and rosy.
That's interesting.
Artemis, yeah.
All right, well, Chris, if people want to follow your work, where should they go?
Well, if you want to read a little bit more, I mean, I've gone quite deep down the rabbit hole. Not
see the book again.
Sorry?
Let's see the book one more time.
Oh, there it is.
Yeah. SpaceX from the ground up.
Yeah. It's not just the past. It's not just the present. It's also the future. There's a lot of this SpaceX story is in the future, and that is a little bit harder to bring together. But there is plenty of evidence out there, and so it's just a question of knitting it all together. So yeah, it's out there. It's on Amazon.
Wonderful.
I recommend you buy it as an ebook, because it's a bit expensive, the Amazon price for
the printed version. Yeah. I think the Kindle in Canada is like $7 or something, so it's pretty reasonably priced.
You can actually get it for free, by the way. I believe if you on Amazon Prime or one of their other deals like Kohl or Kindle Unlimited. Because I noticed there's like hundreds of pages being read all the time, every day. So this is obviously a deal they've set up, and it seems to work. It's getting the product out there. People seem to like it.
Well, thank you so much, Chris. It was a pleasure to catch up with you. Let's not let it be 3 years next time. Let's try and shorten the iteration cycle where we have a chat about what's happening with SpaceX. You're my guy. So definitely keep me posted.
All right. Well, as I say, great to talk to you, and everything's looking okay at the moment. This is just a bump in the road with Starship. Right. Okay.
Thank you so much.
Cheers.
Take care. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks. Bye.